There's a moment in every build where it stops being a collection of parts and starts becoming something real. Up to now, this has been plastic, wood, and a lot of ideas. But once everything comes together, once it stands on its own, we begin to see what it's actually going to be. And today we cross that line. At the back of my studio, behind this door, is something special. A space where stories aren't just told, they're lived. Welcome to Pernicky Ricks, the ultimate guide to crafting spaces that don't just tell stories, they immerse you in them. Today we're building the wall that mounts to the back of the chest. We'll cut the foam, hard coat it, create the supports that bolt the sections together, paint it, and finally attach it to the chest itself. There's a lot to do, so let's get started. First, I'll glue a sheet of 1/8 inch door skin to the pink insulation foam that we'll be using for the wall sections. To do that, I'll apply a generous even coat of carpenter's glue between the door skin and the foam. Once the two pieces are sandwiched together, I'll set them on the router table. It gives me a perfectly flat surface and also puts everything right where it needs to be for cutting once the glue is fully dried. So here are the wall sections roughed out. I've got them laid out on the work table, and you can really start to see what the backdrop wall is going to look like. I cut these on the CNC machine just like the chest components. But this can absolutely be done by hand just as well. I ran this part off camera since you're already familiar with the process and there's really not much to gain from watching the machine do its thing. You'll notice that this section here got a bit melted from a clump of foam wrapping around the 1/2 inch router bit, and that happens from time to time. Even computerized carving isn't perfect. I considered redoing it, but instead I'm going to use it as an opportunity to show you how I'd repair something like this on a bigger project. But before I get into that, I want to clean up these edges and get these individual pieces locked together on the removable support so the wall can mount to the back of the chest. So let's get started on that now. After laying out the wooden supports on the front side of the wall so I can see exactly where the bolt holes need to go to hold everything together, I'll use a ballpoint pen to press marks into the foam. That gives me clear, precise locations to drill through without tearing anything up or guessing later. I'll drill 3/8 inch holes through the entire wall, backing it with a piece of scrap wood. That keeps the plywood from chipping out on the back side and saves my work table from picking up a few extra holes along the way. Now using a hobby knife, I'll remove just enough foam to create a pocket large enough for the 1/4 inch T-nut to sit in. I'm installing these so the wide flange rests against the plywood, with the threaded portion facing outward. That's essentially the reverse of how they're normally used, but it keeps the threaded section from protruding out the back of the panels. I want the rear surface to stay completely flat. Now I'll assemble the threaded knobs that will hold all of this together. The handles are 3D printed, and I'm inserting 1/4 inch by 20 hex bolts into them at a few different lengths, depending on where they're used. Now using the 1x2 pine supports, the threaded knobs, and the T-nuts, I'll bolt the entire wall assembly together. Once the whole wall is fastened together, I'll use some Titebond thick and quick glue to lock the T-nuts in place. That keeps them from spinning since they don't have a mechanical bite into the thin plywood backing. Once the glue is dry, I'll fill the pockets I carved into the face of the wall with expanding spray foam. I'll also fill the melted areas on the damaged panel, then let everything cure overnight. You'll notice I'm using some scrap silicone release paper from the backing of old decal material. This is to keep the expanding foam from sticking the panels together. Alright, this is sat overnight and the spray foam is completely cured. Now I'll shave all of it flush and recut the grout lines by hand that were melted out by the clogged bit. Then we will start shaping the individual cut stones and give them a bit of wear before we hard coat them and give them a coat of paint. Using a 12-inch Milwaukee fixed blade smooth insulation knife, I carefully trim away the excess spray foam, bringing everything back down flush with the surface. I also trim away any excess insulation foam board to clean up the grout line alignment and fix any sections that didn't quite line up the way they were intended to. Once all the excess is trimmed off, it's back outside to start working the edges and corners of the stones with 60 grit sandpaper, knocking them back a bit to give everything a more worn look. Even though this is meant to represent ashlar masonry, adding a little irregularity helps sell the realism and keeps it from feeling too perfect. Now on to the hard coating. I'll mix up some Durham's Rock Hard to about the consistency of sour cream, then apply it across the entire foam surface. The material sets up in about 10 minutes, and the more you mix, the faster it cures, so don't mix more than you can use in that window. I'm using disposable hog's hair brushes for this. You'll also go through a bunch of brushes each batch, so make sure you've got plenty on hand. Even working quickly, I went through about 10 brushes on this project. The basic structure of the wall is now complete. The foam has been shaped, fitted, and locked together, and the hard-coated Durhams is fully cured. And honestly, I'm really pleased with how this is coming together. You can start to see it now. It's no longer just a pile of parts on the table, it's becoming a proper backdrop for the chest. It will mount directly to the back and frame the whole piece. Next, I'll take this back outside for a light sanding. Just enough to knock down the high spots and soften those brush marks so the surface feels more like worn stone. Then we'll bring it back in and I'll start laying down the paint. And that's where it will really start to come alive. If everything goes to plan, by the end of the day, this section should be finished. Back outside once again, I give the entire surface a light sanding with my orbital sander and a 120 grit disc. I'll lose a bit of the Durhams here, but I'm not too concerned about it, since the paint will ultimately finish and unify the surface. Once back inside, I'll lay down the base coat of paint. I'm using 2 shades of a brick red on the smaller stones, and a creamy white on the larger ones that closely matches the natural color of Durham's. I'm applying all of this with the same kind of cheap hog's hair brushes. They're perfect for this kind of work and I don't have to worry about ruining them. For the grout, I'm leaving it as raw Durham's, only touching it up here and there where the brick red spills over. Now I'll mix up a very heavy raw umber acrylic wash with a bit of soap in it. Then load it into a spray bottle and apply it liberally across the entire painted surface. It looks a little scary going on this dark, but it dries down much lighter than it appears at first. And finally, I'll lightly dry brush the high spots with the original base colors. There's really no need to go any lighter than that. This is full scale, so the goal is to build up natural grime and tonal variation, not to fake highlights and shadows the way you would on a small scale model. We've jumped ahead a bit here. The window light box and the tapestry are in place so you can finally see what the whole thing looks like assembled. Aside from a few adjustments and treatments to the window unit itself, visually this is essentially finished. And unlike the model, this entire build breaks down and fits into the chest for storage. Packed away, it's surprisingly light and manageable. So if you want to take it to a convention, a paid GM gig, or wherever you happen to be running your games, you're not hauling something the size and weight of a refrigerator around with you. Next, we'll circle back and finish the false window. That's where this really starts to push into that game theater space. A window that can mimic any time of day, suggesting that whatever lies beyond it isn't quite part of the room, or maybe even part of this time. We'll also take care of the final finishing touches, but that will have to wait until I get back from Harnmoot in April. So look for the next video shortly after that. And remember, at the end of May, I'll be at Strategicon in Los Angeles. If you've enjoyed this, give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing. It really does make a difference. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss what's coming next. If you want a chance to take the game theater in a box home, join me at Strategicon over Memorial Day weekend, where one lucky attendee from my panel will walk away with it. And if you know someone who would appreciate this kind of thing, share the channel with them. It helps more than you might think. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today. And until next time, keep dreaming big, and may your games always have the spaces they deserve.